Let's shatter a belief you've been conditioned to accept for thousands of years. Gods are the ultimate power in existence. Wrong. Flat out wrong. There are beings, real, ancient, and undeniable, who dwarf the so-called gods in power, knowledge, and influence. This comes straight from suppressed texts, forbidden scriptures, and ancient wisdom deliberately buried by those who want to keep you docile and uninformed. For centuries, you've been taught to worship gods as the ultimate authority. But the Gnostics, an early spiritual movement whose teachings were so threatening they were branded heretics, had a radically different take. They claimed the material world wasn't created by the true God, but by a flawed, inferior being they called the demiurge. To the Gnostics, this creator wasn't the pinnacle of divinity. He was a jailer, trapping human souls in a corrupt and imperfect material reality. Above him? Beings of unimaginable light and knowledge, the Aeons. These Aeons are the emanations of the Pleroma, the infinite fullness of divine power and wisdom. They make the gods of this world look like shadows in a cave. According to texts found in the Nag Hammadi Library, a treasure trove of Gnostic scriptures uncovered in 1945, these Aeons aren't just mythical entities. They are archetypal forces that transcend time, space, and matter. Sophia, one of the key Aeons, is described as the embodiment of wisdom itself. It was her desire to create independently of the Pleroma that led to the emergence of the demiurge. And here's the kicker, Sophia didn't create the demiurge intentionally. It was an accident, a cosmic misstep. This makes the god most people pray to not an omnipotent creator, but a product of error, a far cry from the omniscient being we've been led to believe in. Pause and let that sink in. The being many worship as a god might not even be the highest authority. If the Gnostics are right, and their teachings resonate deeply with certain esoteric traditions and modern philosophical inquiries, then everything about our understanding of divinity is flipped upside down. Let's go further back. The concept of beings greater than gods didn't originate with the Gnostics. In ancient Mesopotamian and Babylonian mythology, there were primordial forces like Apsu and Tiamat, vast cosmic entities that predated the gods of their pantheon. Even the Greek Titans, who were overthrown by the Olympian gods, were considered more ancient and more elemental. These stories suggest a recurring theme in human history: gods may rule, but they're not the source. They're secondary players in a much larger, incomprehensible cosmic hierarchy. Still not convinced? Consider this: in the Jewish mystical tradition known as Kabbalah, there's the concept of the Ein Sof, the infinite, which is beyond all understanding and entirely removed from human comprehension. It's not a god in any traditional sense. It's pure being, pure potential. From it emanate 10 sephiro, or attributes, which shape the universe. These sephiro aren't gods, but are often described in terms similar to the Aeons, vast, abstract forces that are closer to the ultimate reality than any deity worshipped in conventional religion. So why has this narrative been erased? Why have we been spoon-fed the idea that gods are the pinnacle of existence? Because acknowledging the existence of beings beyond gods undermines the authority of organized religion. If gods aren't the ultimate power, then the institutions that claim to speak for them lose their grip on you. And make no mistake, power structures don't take kindly to losing control. Let's talk about censorship. Not your modern-day cancel culture or political debates, but the original act of erasing truths when powerful institutions decided what you were allowed to know about the origins of our world, our gods, and the universe itself. These weren't just minor edits or revisions. This was the wholesale suppression of texts that painted a vastly different picture of existence, texts that described beings far superior to gods as we know them. In 1945, a discovery shook the academic and religious worlds: the Nag Hammadi Library. Hidden in clay jars for over 1,600 years, these manuscripts were a collection of Gnostic writings, completely off-script from what you'd find in the Bible. Why were they hidden? Because they challenge everything mainstream religion tells you about God, creation, and humanity's purpose. And trust me, these texts do not hold back. For example, let's dive into the Apocryphon of John. This isn't some dusty, vague scripture. This is a direct counter-narrative to the Genesis story. According to this text, the God who created the material world, the god most people worship is a flawed, arrogant entity. His name? Yaldabaoth, also known as the Demiurge. The Gnostics describe him as a malformed being who, get this, stole his power from a higher divine realm. His creation of the material universe wasn't an act of supreme wisdom, but one born of ignorance and rebellion against higher, more powerful beings. Yaldabaoth isn't the top of the chain. He's a mistake, a cosmic blunder born from the Ein Soph's unintended actions. And here's the juicy part, the texts outright say he declared himself the one true God out of pure arrogance, not because it was true. According to the Apocryphon of John, he even said, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me," which the Gnostics mock as laughably false. Above him and beyond his comprehension are the Aeons, the true emanations of the infinite divine source, the Pleroma. Now, this isn't just philosophical theory. This was a direct threat to the early Christian church, which was consolidating power and authority by promoting the idea of a singular, all-powerful creator. If people believed there were higher beings beyond their God, beings that didn't demand worship but instead offered enlightenment, why would they kneel in submission? Why would they follow the rules? That's why these texts were branded heresy and systematically destroyed. But the Nag Hammadi writings weren't the only ones erased. The Book of Enoch, a text revered by early Jewish and Christian communities, also vanished from official canon. Why? Because it tells the story of the Watchers, a group of angelic beings who descended to Earth and shared forbidden knowledge with humanity. They taught humans about technology, warfare, and even cosmetics, according to the text. While these actions led to their downfall, it raises an uncomfortable question: if gods and angels are supposed to be infallible, why were these beings defying orders, sharing secrets, and altering the course of human history? The Gnostics didn't just write off these actions as sin. They saw them as evidence of a deeper truth: the gods of this world are not infallible. They are flawed, limited, and sometimes outright deceptive. And the beings above them, the Aeons, the true emanations of divine wisdom, don't engage in such petty, manipulative behavior. These texts flip the script entirely. Here's another example: the Gospel of Judas, another banned text discovered in the 1970s. It portrays Judas Iscariot not as a villain, but as the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' mission. In this gospel, Jesus reveals to Judas that the God worshipped by the other disciples is not the true God, but a lesser entity. Jesus speaks of realms beyond comprehension, inhabited by beings far more powerful than the God of this world. So, why weren't you taught this? Why were these texts buried, burned, and branded as blasphemy? Because they dismantle the hierarchy that has controlled humanity for millennia. If gods are not the ultimate power, then neither are their institutions. These texts empower individuals to seek knowledge and enlightenment on their own, without intermediaries. And let's be real, that's not exactly convenient for the people who profit from your obedience. If you think religion sprang up in isolation, pure and untouched, think again. Ancient belief systems were like sponges, soaking up ideas, myths, and symbols from everywhere they could. And it's in this chaotic mixing of traditions that we find even more evidence of beings more powerful than gods. First, let's talk about Baal, one of the most infamous deities from the Canaanite pantheon. Baal wasn't just a storm god, he was a figure of immense power, commanding respect and fear across the ancient Near East. But here's the twist: Baal wasn't the highest power in the Canaanite religion. Above him was El, the supreme god, and even El wasn't the ultimate source of creation. Canaanite mythology speaks of primordial forces, chaotic, unnameable energies, that existed long before the gods. These forces weren't worshipped, they were acknowledged as the raw, unshaped essence of existence. The gods, in contrast, were just administrators of this power, not its source. Now, when the Israelites developed their monotheistic faith, they didn't start from scratch. They absorbed elements of Canaanite religion, rebranded them, and built Yahweh's identity as the supreme God. But traces of older, more powerful forces lingered. For example, in Genesis 1 verse 2, the Spirit of God hovers over the primordial waters. These waters, known as Tehom in Hebrew, are etymologically linked to Tiamat, the Babylonian goddess of chaos. In Mesopotamian myth, Tiamat was a primal being whose destruction by the god Marduk led to the creation of the world. Notice the pattern: gods rising to power by subduing primordial forces greater than themselves. The Greeks, with their famously human-like gods, told similar stories. Zeus, king of the Olympians, only achieved his position by overthrowing the Titans, a race of older, more elemental beings. And who were the Titans afraid of? The primordial deities like Chaos and Nyx, night, abstract forces so vast and incomprehensible that even the gods bowed to them. Greek religion may have celebrated Zeus, but it quietly acknowledged that he was just a cog in a much larger cosmic machine. And then we have Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest organized religions, which introduced the idea of a cosmic battle between good and evil. But here's what most people miss: even in Zoroastrianism, the ultimate divine source, Ahura Mazda, is not the only power. There's a deeper, ineffable force called the Zervan, or infinite time, which precedes and encompasses all things, even the Creator God. Again, the gods are middle management in a hierarchy far beyond what most religious doctrines admit. This brings us to the Roman Empire, the ultimate melting pot of ancient religions. When the Romans conquered Greece, Egypt, and the Near East, they didn't just impose their gods on the people, they absorbed the local deities into their pantheon. The Egyptian god Amun became Jupiter Amun, and the Persian Mithra became Sol Invictus, the unconquered Sunday. This syncretism wasn't about unity, it was about power. The Romans knew that gods weren't absolute. They could be merged, reshaped, and redefined to suit the empire's agenda. But what's truly fascinating is how this blending of beliefs allowed older, more powerful entities to resurface in subtle ways. Take Mithra, for instance. He wasn't just a solar deity, he was a mediator between the material and spiritual worlds, a role that hints at something beyond conventional godhood. Mithra's cult, which became wildly popular among Roman soldiers, taught that the visible gods were mere symbols of a higher, hidden reality. Sound familiar? It's a recurring theme, gods as masks for something infinitely greater. Even Christianity, as it spread through the Roman world, couldn't escape this influence. The Gnostics, who we've discussed earlier, weren't operating in a vacuum. Their concept of Aeons, the beings of light and wisdom who transcend the gods, was shaped by this rich, syncretic tradition. They saw the Christian God not as the ultimate authority, but as one piece of a much larger, more intricate puzzle. Occult traditions across cultures share a strikingly consistent belief: the material world is a distraction, a prison even. The true power lies in the unseen realms, and the entities that reside there make the gods of religion look like amateur puppeteers. The gods may be powerful in their domains, but the occult teaches that they're gatekeepers, not creators, not ultimate beings. Take Hermeticism, for example, one of the most influential esoteric traditions in the Western world. Its teachings are based on the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a mythical figure who was said to bridge the worlds of gods and humans. Hermetic philosophy explicitly states that the material world, ruled by planetary gods, is a lower realm. The real divine knowledge comes from transcending these gods and connecting with the one mind, the source of all creation. And how did Hermetic practitioners attempt this? Through rituals and practices designed to bypass the gods altogether. Alchemy, astrology, and theurgy weren't about pleasing divine beings, they were about manipulating the fundamental forces of reality, forces older and more powerful than the gods themselves. Now let's move to Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition. Kabbalists describe the spiritual universe as a hierarchy of realms, each governed by its own set of rules and beings. At the top is the Ein Sof, the infinite, unknowable source of all existence. Beneath it are the Sephiro, emanations of divine energy that shape reality. But here's the catch: even angels and gods exist within this structure. They're not free agents, they're cogs in the machine of a much larger system. And Kabbalists believe that, with the right knowledge, humans can ascend this hierarchy and connect directly with the infinite. No middlemen required. But the most provocative examples come from the more shadowy corners of the occult, where practitioners openly defied the gods. Look at grimoires, ancient spellbooks used by magicians in the medieval and Renaissance periods. These texts didn't just call on angels or saints, they aimed to summon and control entities that were older, more primal, and often feared even by the gods themselves. The Key of Solomon, one of the most famous grimoires, includes instructions for summoning spirits and compelling them to reveal hidden knowledge. These spirits weren't worshipped, they were tools, means to access power that the gods wanted to keep hidden. Even more controversial are the practices of chaos magicians, who emerged in the 20th century but drew on much older traditions. Chaos magicians reject the very idea of gods as fixed entities. To them, gods are constructs, masks worn by deeper forces of reality. These forces, they argue, can be harnessed and manipulated without any need for religious worship. It's a mindset that strips gods of their authority and puts the practitioner in the driver's seat. And then there's the infamous Aleister Crowley, one of the most polarizing figures in modern occult history. Love him or hate him, Crowley's work in Pleroma, a spiritual philosophy he claimed was revealed to him by a being called Aiwass, is a direct challenge to traditional notions of godhood. Crowley described Aiwass not as a god but as a representative of a higher intelligence, one that exists outside the framework of conventional religion. His writings suggest that humanity's destiny is not to worship gods but to become gods, to rise above the petty squabbles of divine politics and connect with the forces that truly shape the universe. What ties all these traditions together is a refusal to accept the gods at face value. Occultists didn't just challenge the gods, they bypassed them. They sought out the deeper truths and higher powers that the gods were either too limited or too afraid to reveal. And their practices were met with relentless persecution, not because they were evil, but because they threatened the monopoly of religious institutions. The gods you've been told to worship? They're not the endgame. They're placeholders, intermediaries, distractions. The real power lies in the forces that predate them, the beings that operate on levels of existence the gods can't even comprehend. And the occultists, whether you call them heretics, mystics, or visionaries, were the ones brave enough to look behind the curtain. If you think gods sit at the top of the cosmic pyramid, let me stop you right there. The ancient world was filled with beliefs in spiritual realms that weren't just governed by gods, but by vast networks of entities that surpassed them in power, scope, and purpose. Let's start with angelology. In Christian and Jewish mysticism, angels aren't just messengers or winged figures you see on Christmas cards. The traditional hierarchies of angels, laid out by theologians like Dionysius the Areopagite, describe 9 ranks, divided into 3 triads. And here's the kicker, the higher you go up this hierarchy, the less these beings care about the material world. At the very top, you have the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones. These aren't your Sunday school angels. Seraphim are said to exist so close to the divine source that their primary function is to bask in its glory, far removed from human affairs. Thrones? They're described as literal manifestations of divine justice and authority. And cherubim? Forget the cutesy Renaissance depictions, they're guardians of divine mysteries, standing between the unknowable infinite and everything else. These beings don't take orders from gods, they exist on a level of purity and power that makes the gods seem like bureaucrats. Now, compare that to the role of planetary gods in ancient astrology. The planets, associated with gods like Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, were thought to influence human fate. But above them? The fixed stars, representing eternal, unchanging truths of the cosmos. Philosophers like Plotinus in the Neoplatonic tradition described these stars as closer to the divine than any god or planet, radiating a pure, incorruptible energy that flows down into the lower realms. Even in this ancient framework, gods are middle tier at best. And this isn't unique to the Western world. In Hinduism, you have the concept of Brahman, the ultimate reality that is formless, infinite, and beyond comprehension. The gods of the Hindu pantheon, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, are considered powerful, yes, but they are still bound by the cycles of time and the structure of Maya, the illusion of material reality. Brahman, by contrast, is eternal and untouched by the limitations of form or personality. Again, gods are intermediaries, not the pinnacle. But let's get even more abstract. In Gnosticism, the Aeons aren't just beings, they're principles, emanations of divine wisdom and power. Each Aeon represents a specific aspect of the infinite, and together they form the Pleroma, the totality of divine existence. The gods, in this view, are merely distortions of these higher principles, like shadows cast by the light of the Aeons. And as we discussed before, the demiurge, the supposed creator of the material world, is a minor player in this cosmic drama, blinded by his own ignorance. Let's pivot to a lesser-known but equally fascinating system, the Yazidi faith. The Yazidis believe in Melek Taus, the peacock angel, who is not a god but a being of immense power and wisdom. Melek Taus serves the divine essence that is beyond all comprehension, often misunderstood as God. What's fascinating here is that Melek Taus is depicted as independent, not bound by the morality or rules imposed by human religions. It's yet another example of a being that transcends traditional notions of gods. And if you want to get really weird, look into the Islamic concept of Nur Muhammad, or the light of Muhammad. This isn't a god or even a prophet. It's described as the first creation, a divine light that existed before anything else, including the angels, prophets, and the material universe. It's a metaphysical reality that dwarfs the gods in both significance and scope. Now let's dive into one of the most controversial chapters in spiritual history, the stories of the beings who dared to defy gods. I'm not talking about humans questioning divine authority. I'm talking about powerful, cosmic entities, angels, watchers, and others who went rogue. These beings didn't just bend the rules, they broke them. And in doing so, they revealed truths that shake the foundations of every major religious system. Take the Book of Enoch, an ancient text so dangerous to mainstream theology that it was excluded from the Bible. Why? Because it tells the story of the Watchers, a group of angelic beings tasked with observing humanity. Instead of simply watching, they intervened. These entities descended to Earth, taught humans forbidden knowledge, and, according to the text, even interbred with them. They shared secrets of metallurgy, weapon-making, and astrology, skills that transformed humanity overnight. But why is this so important? Because the Watchers weren't operating under divine authority. They acted independently, defying the hierarchy of heaven. And the consequences? They were cast down, imprisoned in the depths of the earth. Yet, their actions left a permanent mark on humanity. Think about it, gods and religious institutions are supposed to control what knowledge we're allowed to access. But the Watchers gave humanity the tools to wield power on its own terms. That's not just rebellion, that's an act of defiance against the divine order itself. The Watchers are just one example of what many ancient cultures describe as fallen beings, entities who step outside the boundaries set by the gods. In Greek mythology, there's the story of Prometheus. Unlike the Watchers, Prometheus wasn't punished for lust or ambition, he was punished for helping humanity. By stealing fire from the gods and giving it to humans, he bridged the gap between mortals and the divine. Fire wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of enlightenment, power, and independence. And for that crime, Zeus condemned him to eternal torment. Sound familiar? It's a recurring theme, powerful beings going against the gods to empower humanity and suffering for it. But it doesn't stop there. In Islamic tradition, there's Iblis, commonly equated with Satan. But Iblis's story is more complex than the simple good versus evil narrative. According to Islamic texts, Iblis refused to bow to Adam, not out of rebellion against God, but because he saw bowing to a mortal as an act of shirk, placing someone or something above God. In this interpretation, Iblis's defiance isn't evil, it's a commitment to a higher principle. Again, we see a being stepping outside the rules, acting in a way that challenges the established order. Then there's the Hindu tradition of the Asuras. These beings are often depicted as enemies of the gods, locked in eternal conflict with the Devas. But calling the Asuras evil oversimplifies the story. Many Asuras are depicted as wise, powerful, and deeply spiritual. They often challenge the Devas not out of malice, but because they represent a different cosmic principle, a balance to the gods' dominance. This duality is essential, and it echoes a larger truth: the forces that challenge the gods aren't inherently wrong. They're part of a much bigger system that transcends good and evil. And let's not forget the Gnostic view, which flips the entire narrative on its head. To the Gnostics, the so-called fallen beings aren't villains. They're liberators. Take the serpent in the Garden of Eden. In mainstream Christianity, the serpent is Satan, a deceiver. But in Gnostic texts like the Hypostasis of the Archons, the serpent is a hero, a bringer of knowledge who defies the demiurge, the lesser god who created the material world, to enlighten humanity. The serpent doesn't trick Adam and Eve, it frees them from ignorance. Here's the pattern you should be seeing, over and over, across cultures and belief systems. We find stories of beings who defy the gods. And their defiance isn't petty or self-serving, it's often rooted in a higher purpose, a desire to transcend the limitations imposed by divine rulers. These beings are portrayed as fallen, cursed, or evil, but their actions reveal a deeper truth: gods are not the ultimate arbiters of morality, power, or wisdom. Long before organized religion, long before gods were given names and personalities, ancient cultures were grappling with forces so vast and so powerful that they couldn't be personified. These weren't gods as you understand them today, they were primal, universal energies that made even the most powerful deities look like small-time players. One of the best examples comes from Mesopotamian mythology, arguably one of the oldest and most influential religious systems in human history. The Sumerians and Babylonians didn't just have gods, they had primordial beings who existed before the gods. Take Tiamat, the goddess of chaos and saltwater. She wasn't just a deity, she embodied the chaotic, untamed forces of the cosmos. When the younger gods, led by Marduk, rose to power, their first act wasn't to create, it was to destroy Tiamat. Her death marked the beginning of order, but the older, chaotic essence of the universe didn't disappear. It simply got buried, hidden under layers of myth and rewritten history. What's fascinating here is that Tiamat's story mirrors similar myths from other cultures. In Greek mythology, you have chaos, the formless void that predates everything, even the gods. Out of chaos came Nyx, night, Erebus, darkness, and other primordial forces that existed long before Zeus and his Olympian crew took the stage. And these primordial entities weren't just forgotten, they were feared. Even the gods treaded carefully around them. Zeus may have been the king of the gods, but he wasn't touching Nyx. Why? Because Nyx's power wasn't something you could fight or control. It was absolute. Now, let's talk about the Norse mythology twist on this theme. In the Norse cosmology, there's Ginnungagap, the yawning void that existed before anything else. From this void, the realms of fire and ice collided to create Ymir, the first giant, and eventually the gods. But here's the kicker: Ginnungagap didn't go away. It remained as a looming presence in Norse cosmology, a reminder that everything, even the gods, emerged from something far greater than themselves. But this isn't just a Western thing. In Hinduism, the concept of Maya, the illusion of reality, is another layer of this same idea. While the gods of the Hindu pantheon engage in battles, create worlds, and maintain order, they are still bound by Maya. The ultimate reality, Brahman, exists beyond this illusion, untouched by the struggles of gods and humans alike. It's another reminder that the gods are just part of the system, they're not its architects. Now let's pull in some lesser-known myths. Have you ever heard of the Apsu? In Babylonian mythology, Apsu was the freshwater counterpart to Tiamat's saltwater chaos. Together, they represented the totality of the primordial oceans. But when the younger gods rose to power, Apsu was also slain, his essence repurposed to create the heavens and earth. Again, the narrative is clear: the gods didn't create power, they stole it, inherited it, or reshaped it from something far older and far more potent. Even in Zoroastrianism, which introduced some of the earliest ideas about monotheism, you have Zervan, the god of infinite time. Zervan isn't worshipped like Ahura Mazda, the good god, or Angra Mainyu, the destructive force. Instead, Zervan exists as the ultimate source of both. Time itself is the primordial reality from which everything else flows, including the gods. Ahura Mazda may be powerful, but he's still just a part of the system Zervan governs. What all these myths have in common is a clear hierarchy. Gods may be powerful, but they're not ultimate. They exist within systems, subject to forces that they don't control and can barely comprehend. The gods are storytellers, but they're telling stories about forces that existed before them, forces that will outlast them. Much of what we know, or think we know, about gods has been carefully curated, edited, and, in some cases, outright fabricated by those in power. It's not just about worship, it's about control. And when you dig into the lost and suppressed knowledge of ancient civilizations, you start to see a pattern. Gods are often propped up as the ultimate authority, while the truly powerful beings, forces that make gods look like pawns, are either erased from history or rewritten as dangerous, evil, or irrelevant. Take ancient Egypt, for example. Most people know about the Egyptian gods, Ra, Osiris, Isis, but fewer people talk about the Netjeru, the mysterious and formless primordial forces from which these gods arose. The Netjeru weren't deities in the traditional sense, they were principles of cosmic order and chaos that existed beyond human comprehension. Even the gods of Egypt were subservient to Ma'at, the eternal principle of truth, balance, and justice. Ma'at wasn't a goddess you could pray to, she was the very structure of reality itself, immutable and untouchable by even the most powerful gods. But when Egyptian theology was simplified over centuries, the focus shifted to gods that could be anthropomorphized, worshipped, and controlled by the ruling priesthood. The abstract, incomprehensible forces faded into the background. Let's jump to Christianity, specifically the early centuries when the religion was being codified. Early Christians inherited a rich, chaotic tapestry of beliefs from Judaism, Gnosticism, and Greco-Roman traditions. But as the Church consolidated power, it ruthlessly eliminated alternative narratives. Think about it, the Gnostic texts found in Nag Hammadi weren't just lost, they were destroyed. Why? Because they painted a picture of a cosmos ruled by layers of beings far beyond the reach of the Creator God. These beings, the Aeons, represented aspects of divine wisdom and light that were untethered to any single religious institution. Recognizing their existence would have destabilized the Church's claim that their God was the ultimate power. So, the Aeons were erased, and the demiurge, the flawed creator, was repackaged as the one true God. But this isn't just a Western phenomenon. Look at ancient China. In Taoism, the concept of the Tao transcends any notion of gods. The Tao is the ultimate reality, the source of all creation, and it can't be personified, worshipped, or even fully understood. The gods in Taoism, like the Jade Emperor, are important, sure, but they're functionaries within a system dictated by the Tao. Over time, though, the emphasis shifted to gods and rituals that reinforce social and political hierarchies. The abstract, limitless concept of the Tao became a philosophical idea, sidelined in favor of practices that could be controlled by the state. Let's also talk about the Americas. In Mesoamerican cultures, like the Maya and Aztecs, gods like Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca were central figures, but they weren't the end-all. Their myths often reference forces that predate and overshadow them. For example, in Aztec cosmology, the universe itself was created and destroyed multiple times in a cycle driven by incomprehensible cosmic energies. The gods, including the mighty sun god Huitzilopochtli, were just participants in this endless cycle. They didn't control it, they were caught in it, just like humans. But as Mesoamerican societies grew more hierarchical, their rituals and myths were shaped to centralize power around specific gods, reflecting the needs of the ruling elite. And here's a controversial one, the Abrahamic God. In the Bible, the God of the Old Testament has moments where his authority is questioned. Think about Job, a man whose suffering seems like the result of a bet between God and Satan. It's not exactly the kind of narrative you'd expect from an all-powerful deity. Even more striking is how the Bible occasionally references beings like the Nephilim, giants born of the union between angels and humans, or the Divine Council, a group of lesser gods or beings that God interacts with. These references suggest a more complex hierarchy of power than what later theology allowed. But over time, the focus narrowed to a monotheistic God who held absolute authority, leaving behind the messy, fascinating cosmology that hinted at higher powers. The pattern is crystal clear. Wherever you look, the most powerful beings, the ones beyond gods, the ones that represent true cosmic forces, are downplayed, demonized, or erased entirely. Why? Because gods can be controlled. They can be given names, faces, and rituals. They can be tied to specific institutions that consolidate power. But the primal forces? The Aeons, the Netjeru, the Tao, the eternal cycles? They're too big, too abstract, too uncontrollable for human systems to harness. Look at sacred geometry. You've probably seen the flower of life pattern or heard about the golden ratio, but here's what most people miss. These patterns aren't just mathematical curiosities. They represent the fundamental structures of reality, forces that predate and underlie the existence of gods. Cultures from ancient Egypt to Mesopotamia to China encoded these designs into their temples, art, and monuments, not as symbols of worship but as acknowledgments of the deeper forces shaping the universe. The gods themselves were seen as manifestations of these underlying principles, not the originators of them. Let's get specific: the Great Pyramid of Giza. This isn't just a tomb for pharaohs, it's a mathematical marvel, aligning with celestial bodies and incorporating geometric principles that suggest a deep understanding of universal constants. The Egyptians weren't just worshipping gods like Ra and Osiris, they were building structures that resonated with forces far beyond what their gods represented. They were tapping into the cosmic blueprint, something the gods themselves couldn't control. Now let's talk about astrology, not the pop culture version where your daily horoscope tells you you'll have a bad hair day, but the ancient practice of mapping celestial movements to understand the underlying mechanics of reality. In many ancient systems, gods were linked to planets and stars, but the stars themselves were seen as conduits for something much greater. The ancient Chaldeans, for example, didn't just observe the heavens to predict human events, they used astrology to connect with the universal forces that governed the entire cosmos. The gods were merely intermediaries in this system, tools for accessing a much larger, incomprehensible framework. But it's not just ancient civilizations that point to this reality. Modern physics has its own version of these hidden forces. Concepts like dark matter and dark energy describe phenomena that account for 95% of the universe's mass and energy, forces we can barely comprehend, let alone interact with. And here's the kicker: some of the most advanced scientific theories today align with ancient esoteric concepts. The idea of a multidimensional reality, explored in string theory, mirrors what mystics have been saying for millennia: the visible universe is just one layer of a much more complex system. Even in religion, these higher forces occasionally slip through the cracks. Take the Christian concept of the Logos, often translated as word, but more accurately understood as the underlying principle of order and reason in the universe. The Gospel of John explicitly states, "In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God." But think about this: the Logos isn't described as a personified deity. It's a force, a principle, something that both transcends and permeates divinity. It's one of the rare moments where mainstream religion hints at the existence of something greater than the gods it preaches. Even in modern art and pop culture, echoes of these hidden truths persist. Science fiction often explores the idea of vast, incomprehensible beings or forces. Think the monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey, or the Force in Star Wars. These aren't just entertaining plot devices, they're reflections of our deep, subconscious recognition that gods, as we understand them, are not the final word. They're placeholders for something much bigger, much older, and much more powerful. Here's the bottom line: throughout history, across cultures, and even into the modern age, evidence of beings and forces more powerful than gods is everywhere. They've been hidden in geometry, buried in mythology, and even hinted at in cutting-edge science. But they're not gone. They're just waiting for us to rediscover them. So, to everyone who stuck with me through this journey, thank you. Seriously, it means a lot that you've taken the time to explore these ideas with me. There's so much more out there than what we've been taught, and the fact that you're here, questioning and learning, shows that you're part of something bigger. Don't stop now, keep digging, keep asking questions, and who knows? Maybe one day we'll uncover even more of the truth. Until next time.